Action. It says, oh, here we go. Okay, it is recording now. So, hello and welcome to the show that has no name. I'm your host, Pannobhasa. Also have other names. And this is my honored guest, Numa, who also has other names. And
yes.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about ancient Indo-Aryan or ancient Indo-European paganism and whatever else we feel like talking about. But the main thread, I think, is going to be mainly early Indo-European paganism to the extent of our capacity. And I would say that you, Numa, know more about it than I do. My expertise is mainly Indian and a little bit of Greek and Roman stuff, and not much beyond that.
Well, it's
most of the talking.
Yeah, well, it's a very extensive topic, many branches, just like the tree of the Indo-European family itself. And as you said, you're very well acquainted with one particular branch in pretty good detail, which would be the one of the more famous known ones for a lot of good reasons, the Indo-Iranian branch, which is the mother branch of both all the Indic and the Iranian peoples and various different religions that have come out of that, which we know mostly is Hinduism and then Buddhism. And then in the Iranian, all we really know about is Zoroastrianism in the Iranian branch. And there's some pagan traditions too that kind of got buried at some point. But yes, so that's a big one. And the origins of this branch we can know pretty well through both linguistics and archaeology. There is a now very well-known archaeological site in what's now Russia in the southern Urals region, so which would be the steppe region north of the Aral Sea, or what's left of it, going all the way up to where the Ural Mountains are. So some archaeologists and linguists think that the culture that lived there around 2500 BC or so might have been the ancestral culture of what became the Indo-Aryan and the Iranian peoples. So obviously they would have migrated south, taken over a whole bunch of people like the Indo-Europeans do everywhere they migrated, and then split off and sort of diverged their different ways into all the cultures that sort of came out of that wave of conquest.
That would be before, like, what is called the Andronovo culture. That's like one of the early eastern branches of the Indo-Europeans.
Yeah, that culture would have been the one they migrated far east on the steppe. They would have split off from what was called the corded ware culture. So that was a very early Indo-European culture that was one of the northern end of the Proto-Indo-European. So you have what they call the Pontic Step, which is in Ukraine and southern Russia today, so north of the Black Sea. So the Proto-Indo-Europeans were mainly along the rivers, north of the Black Sea and the massive steppe land between those rivers, where they developed they domesticated the horse. This is one of the major reasons why they took over so much of the world. They domesticated the horse, developed the spoked wheel. Now the wheel existed prior in Mesopotamia, but they took it the extra step and made the spoked wheel, which made it easier to haul around lots of stuff across these wide plains. So you had two main Proto-Indo-European cultures. The southern part, closer to the Black Sea, you had the Yamnaya culture, and to the north of that, you had the corded ware. And there was actually two different male lineages from each culture. So they might have been totally separate tribes at some point, and then they kind of merged. There might have been like a lingua franca event. So they adopted the same language, but then they split off in their different ways. So anyway, I can go on for hours about this.
Yeah, but I'd like to interrupt right here. Do you think that this two main subgroups composing what is now called Proto-Indo-Europeans, do you think that could be the origin of the myth that is found in India and Greece and probably elsewhere of the gods and the titans at war, and the gods or the devas prevailing and the asuras or the titans being defeated and imprisoned? It could be just like these two groups with two different pantheons, and when they merged somewhat, there had to be like a religious war, and so it might be just more of a human ideological war rather than actual gods and titans.
Yeah, I mean that could have been the reason if there were two different tribal groups with competing priesthoods and different pantheons. That could very well be. We see the Asuras, we see the Aesir in the Norse culture, the Germanic, and then there was another class of gods called the Vanir, and there was a war between those two classes of gods in the Norse mythology. And of course, as you mentioned, the Titans and the Olympian gods, there was a war between them. So it might have been a very ancestral story that just morphed as each of these cultures split off. It just morphed and kind of conformed to the mythologies that developed in each of those cultures. But that same kind of memory sort of remained there. So yeah, that could very well be.
Yeah, you might know more about this than I do, but it seems like the Persians actually picked the Asuras to be the winning side. Like Ahura Mazda, who is like the god of light for the Zoroastrians. I mean, Ahura is just the what's the ancient Persian language? I can't remember the name of it.
Avestan, I think that's what they call it.
Yeah, that's Asura, right?
Yeah, that's so it's a funny thing that so the people who maintain the Vedic religion, a lot of things where they had the consonant S in the middle of the word, it would be an H in the whatever Avestic speakers. Now, Avestan and like really early Vedic Sanskrit were such similar languages. Like anyone who's familiar with Sanskrit, they can look at Avestan and just recognize a lot of it. It's just like a lot of the same words, maybe different spellings, some different case endings on some nouns and verbs and things like that. But they just look like two dialects of a very similar language.
Yeah. Yeah, so that is interesting to me, and I think a lot of people don't realize that the war of the gods and the titans that is found in Greek mythology is also found in Buddhist texts and other northern Indian texts.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah, that sort of thing would have been preserved quite a bit.
Yeah, and so they do know some things fairly with some amount of confidence with regard to the really primordial Indo-European or Proto-Indo-European religion. For example, some equivalent of Zeus or Jupiter, well, some sky god was in the pantheon apparently, because I mean he's found pretty much from east to west in the Indo-European nationalities. There's
Right.
Jauntry in the Rig Veda, who is, I mean, he's already in decline in India. He's nowhere near the top of the pantheon anymore. But Europe, especially, like Zeus, Pater, or whatever. I'm not really good in Greek, but it's the same as Jupiter. And then you had a number of Germanic gods who turned into a war god because the Germans liked war so much. Apparently, they turned their king of the sky god into a war god.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, it's interesting. It was probably a primordial sky father, Deus Pitar. I think maybe I don't know. I can't pronounce my Proto-Indo-European pronunciation. I need to brush up on it a bit. Yeah. So there was a primordial sky father, and it makes sense considering the environment. There was a steppe environment. So the biggest natural feature is going to be the big open sky. That's what you see everywhere, every day. So the idea of, basically this ever-present heaven overlooking, you can't really avoid it. There's not many trees on the steppes. You just see this big sky everywhere. So it's a logical choice that would be the father, great father, the all father of this religion. But it's interesting in the north how this so you get the sky father sort of. So you take in the Germanic religion, you take the god Thor. He's not a father god, but he kind of preserves some of the features of the sky father, some of the other deities in that religion too. So you get in the Norse religion and the Slavic religion, you get these thunder gods who are like these, badass warrior deities. Probably I've seen speculated the same god as Indra in the Vedic pantheon. I've seen the comparison made. And in the Greek, so the Zeus and Jupiter has both the function of the father and the thunder, which is missing in the north. The thunder is more like a Hercules type of god. So that's a huge difference between the So the Mediterranean split off, so in the Indo-European and the stuff in the north.
Yeah, I've also seen some videos by Survive the Jive, who was really into the early Indo-Europeans, and he was emphasizing a lot just the importance of the horse for the Indo-Europeans in their religious ceremonies and so forth. Like the horse sacrifice was considered to be possibly the most important sacrifice. And of course, Europeans apparently had priests performing fire sacrifices mainly for worldly benefits. They didn't really have much of a metaphysical philosophy going in the early days.
Yeah, possibly not. We never really know. Those things didn't get, if there was any kind of deep philosophy, it wasn't getting written down. It would be preserved in oral teachings and hymns and things like that. And, you know, maybe the higher priests would get a more candid explanation of what those doctrines mean when they've proven themselves to be wise, you know, wise men, or, you know, the rishis in the Vedic culture. So yeah, we don't really know. One thing I'm working on now is extrapolating very interesting philosophy from the Norse tradition, because of course we don't have that in written form. They never wrote, you know, the pagan Germanics never developed a pagan Germanic civilization that was cut short by Christianity. So we never had like any Plato's or Stoics writers or Aristotle's in Germanic culture. So it doesn't really have its own native philosophy, but there's a lot of interesting concepts in the Germanic religion it's very similar to what we might find in some of the Indic ones. The Germanics had a very developed concept of karma. Actually, we have a word in English. The problem with modern English is a lot of words of spiritual significance have just been dumbed down over the centuries, and they just mean really mundane things. So take, for example, the word weird in English. When you say weird, it just means strange or, you know, something out of the ordinary. But this word used to mean basically karma, and it was spelled W-Y-R-D.
Oh, really? I remember in I think it's Macbeth, the witches are called the Weird Sisters. But it wasn't just saying that they were strange. It had some supernatural or they were the fates. I think the fates may have been called like the Weird Sisters, something like that.
Right, in the Norse tradition, there's actually a word called the Norns, and those are basically equivalent to the Fates. So the Weird Sisters might have just been a different way of saying what is the Norns in the Norse tradition. But yeah, so they did have that weird, and then there's a word called, I've seen it spelled like 15 different ways, but you could call it Orlag or Orlay. That is like a person's individualized karma or a group's individualized karma. There were multiple words for, wasn't just a singular karma concept. It was karma is general, the whole web of causality in the entire cosmos. So that's really what weird is. It's like the greater karma of everything.
Well, so that would be sort of like cosmic order or something, like Varuna in the Vedas, or Rita, something like that. And I think the Greeks had a similar concept of just sort of a cosmic order, a cosmic justice kind of a thing. Didn't they?
Yeah, they did. All the Indo-European cultures had as their kind of one of their top concepts of the cosmic order.
Yeah. So even the gods have to obey the cosmic order, that kind of a thing.
Yeah, and we get in the Norse religion, we get that too. It's stated many times in the sources that the gods are also subject to weird, to basically cosmic order and fate, and they are not immortal in the Norse religion. The gods eventually die. Actually, the ending story, the tale of Ragnarok, is where the gods all end up dying in the end.
Really, all of them.
Yeah.
So that's sort of like end of like a cosmic cycle or something, or.
Yeah, so when you read it, they have this massive war with the Jotuns, or in English you can call it the Ettins. They're like this race of giants similar to the Titans, and they all battle, and then everything, you know. So each of the main gods kind of has their Ettin counterpart. So they represent more of these kind of just raw primal aspects of the cosmic order. Also forces of chaos and disorder. They all battle in the end, and to me, it's an allegory of what would happen at the end of the universe, whether it's a great crunch or just like a heat death, some kind of event where the universe dissolves at the end.
Yeah, I think Indian cosmology is usually destroyed by fire.
Right. So, of course, that was preserved by Icelandic scribes who had already converted to Christianity. This is where we get all our sources on the Norse religion from. So in some of the texts, there's obviously Christian tampering in there. So they wanted to, I think the scribes, they were like loyal to their own culture. They wanted to preserve it, but at the same time they had to say, well, our people, they really just worship demons the whole time until the glorious good news revelation of Jesus came along and saved us. But, I'm going to kind of just preserve this.
Yeah, there's
anyway.
that in Beowulf also, I think.
Yeah, Beowulf's extremely, extremely Christianized.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we get that. It's interesting seeing a lot of these same concepts in there. Funny enough, in the Greek religion, there's really not a whole lot of anything we can directly call karma. Not in the mythological religion itself.
Yeah.
Some of you have to get into the philosophers to really kind of get at that.
Or to some degree, also in the playwrights. It's like for example, Oedipus. He has like the character flaw, the anger, which then causes him to kill his father, and then it's like fate punishes him in the end for killing his father and having sex with his mother. I mean, that just cannot go unpunished. And so, in a way, there is a kind of cosmic justice involved.
Yeah, they did have fate, which is not you're literally fatalistic. It's just kind of everything happens. Everything's kind of preordained to happen the way it is, and all you can really. This is almost kind of a more Middle Eastern concept. I think the Near Eastern cultures had quite a bit of influence on the Greek way of at least the mythological Greek way of thinking, where everything's just fatalistic and preordained, and your job as a human being is just to kind of just take it like a champ and not get salty about it.
A certain amount of stoicism.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, that's really a major difference, I think, in the psychology of the ancient Indo-European or just the ancient mind and the modern mind is they just considered suffering and death to just be inevitable. So, I mean, just like when it comes, you just take it with much equanimity and fortitude as you can muster.
Right. Exactly. They would have back then, this grave fear of death, which is basically the norm today, that would have been seen as an ultimate act of just cowardice.
Yeah. I mean, that was just total disgrace.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And today, it's just everything's flipped around. It's the opposite. Now we have this certain generation of people I won't name that's just deathly afraid of dying, even though they're at that age now where it's just they're just gradually dropping off. And you see some of them who are a lot of the politicians are from this particular age bracket, and they just refuse to let go of power. But that's a whole other diversion. Yeah.
So I assume like the Germans and the including the Norse and the Celts would also have like animal sacrifices and fires and possibly a hereditary priesthood, that sort of thing.
Yep, that was all pretty standard. They all did animal sacrifices. That's really just general paganism everywhere back then. They all did it in some way or another.
Even maybe some human sacrifices early on.
Yeah, some of that was going on too, though. We have a little bit. I'm not gonna here defend the practice necessarily, but we have a bit of a distorted view of it. It wasn't like Aztec style, where it's just like willy-nilly mass psychosis of industrial scale, murdering people on the temple steps. But so back in these Northern European tribal cultures, it was more a type of capital punishment. And it's like if the state, meaning the tribe, there was no real state, it was a tribal system. If the tribe is going to officially kill somebody for some transgressions, it might as well be done in a respectful and dignified manner with praise to whatever god is invoked for the particular killing. So that's more.
Oh,
go ahead.
Continue. Oh, I was just going to say, so there's no idea of a criminal being sort of an inferior offering. You want a lot of sacrifices. You're supposed to sacrifice the best rather than if you're sacrificing your lame cow, then that's obviously not going to please the gods.
Right. Yeah. So it makes me think there was some greater spiritual purpose that basically a capital punishment was conducted in a ritualistic manner. So now the using that to sort of demonize the peoples who practice it. It was actually the Romans first probably maybe exaggerated what the Celts were doing with that. I mean, they might have practiced this a lot, but the Romans certainly used it as a form of propaganda against the Celts to kind of justify the wholesale conquest and destruction of their culture.
Yeah. Yeah, no human sacrifice is one of their big rules.
Yeah, so part of the ultimate ownage of the Celts, who were the Romans' greatest competitors in continental Europe for several centuries, was to just basically cultural destruction, destroying the Druid priesthoods. Now, the Celts were known for being fractured into these kind of fratricidal, constantly warring tribes.
Yeah,
They
that
were
was
known as
the main weakness. They didn't unify until it was too late.
Yeah, they were drunk and having just petty disputes constantly. But so the hereditary priesthood, the Druids were like the unifying factor of all the Celts. These priests would travel between tribes all over the place, really, and they'd serve as like judges and mediators in all sorts of conflicts, among other, ceremonial, ritualistic. There were seers and wise men and that sort of thing. But yeah, they were the judges who resolved conflicts, and they were respected more than anyone. So if you had two clans having a big brawl, Druids come through, they'd put their weapons down and listen to what the Druids had to say. They were kind of the last word. So I guess they were the cultural glue that held the otherwise just fractured Celtic world together. So for the Romans, it would have been an obvious advantage to destroy what unified them, and then you can, just turn the tribes against one another, which the Romans did. Part of the conquest was playing one tribe off one another. The Romans were sort of the masters of divide and conquer.
Yeah, definitely. Always take the side of the weaker
Right.
country of your neighboring countries. Yeah.
That's right. So yeah, after the Romans were done, there were no more Druids really left in Gaul, which that's France today. The rest of them were back in the British Isles, I think, was the remainder of them, in like Ireland and England, and there was like an island, I forget which island off the coast of England, that was kind of like a Druid sanctuary.
It was Anglesey? Is that
Yes. Right? Yeah, I believe that was. Yeah. And then, Christianity put the final blow on whatever was left of the Druids.
Yeah, whatever was left of the pagans, for that matter.
Yeah. Whatever was left of the pagans.
A few ritual things and that sort of thing that got incorporated into the Catholic Church.
Yeah, I think a lot of the remnant Druids probably became those famed Irish monks who preserved civilization after the fall of the Roman Empire.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember reading somewhere that the Druids would, like when a king or a chieftain was showing signs of feebleness, this is all in accordance with like James Frazier's The Golden Bough. He had this elaborate theory of, the king or the priest, or not the priest, the king or the chief is like the personification of the entire tribe. And if you want the tribe to be strong, the king has to be strong. And so when he starts becoming old and feeble, sometimes when his first white hairs start appearing, he would be ritually sacrificed or required to kill himself. And I read that the Druids would sacrifice the aging kings and then prognosticate the future just from the entrails or the way the blood would spurt out, that sort of thing. Although it could just be Roman propaganda, like you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, but I think it sounds like it's based on something that
it's also like in India and other, various other ancient cultures where they had this idea of, the king must be strong and vital, so when he starts losing it, then he's got to go.
That's right. Yeah, Sacral Kingship was that was kind of a constant throughout the Indo-European world.
Yeah.
And that so the early Indo-Europeans, this probably came from, now any kind of Indo-European archaeology people are familiar with, the biggest feature, the barrow mounds, the big burial mounds that are all throughout the steppes and in various places. Yeah, the kurgan. Yeah, that's the name of it. So that these are probably the prototypes of the sacral kings of these tribes. They were buried in these mounds. Now, I think among most of these tribes, most commoners were cremated. That was the typical practice. But the kings were buried in a mound with all their worldly possessions. So it was believed that they can preserve the actual ghost of the king, like a wraith or ghost form, to protect over So it would basically be in a spectral, the king would be in a spectral body that would oversee the unseen spiritual side of the tribe and the surroundings, and maybe keep away other like bad spirits or things like that. That was the belief they had. That's why they were buried in the way they were.
Yeah, just as an aside, I would like to just observe that the Buddhist pagoda is ultimately descended from these kurgans, or burial mounds honoring a chieftain. Then they became a kind of burial mound honoring the relics of a saint or a great king. And now they're just pretty much all over places like Burma.
Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Funny how though that spreads, and it sort of is how things evolve way out of their original context. They become a symbol, and
Yeah.
it's fun tracing it back to its origin.
Yeah, but the bell-shaped pile of bricks with the gold plating on it, and then the jewels at the top, originally came from these early Indo-European burial mounds.
Yeah. Now this is, I think that you've had conversations with people about this, but this has led to the wild theorizing. Though the Buddha was actually a Scythian because the because it's shaped like a kurgan. It's I know you saw some people like theorizing on that. I think there was a book put out where I forget the author's name, but they kind of take really very circumstantial evidence and sort of glue it together.
I think it's Beckwith, or if
Beckwith, yes.
Excuse me. Yeah, where he's
Right.
got yeah, he had this elaborate theory where Darius the Great, or Darius the Great, appointed the Buddha, or Gautama, or whatever his real name supposedly was, as a satrap of northwest India. He was a Scythian that was kind of transplanted into India, and that he's got it worked out so that many of the suttas are actually veiled, like refutations of Zoroastrianism, this sort of thing. But
that's right.
I really, as a Buddhist, I really can't take it very seriously, because he seems to assume practically, I mean, just for starters, that almost everything in the Buddhist texts is just essentially wrong. I mean,
that's a weird premise to write a whole
philosophy to be valid, and the history and everything else he considers invalid also, so it doesn't leave very much.
Yeah, it doesn't make much sense. And you think about it, it's just like you have to apply the Occam's razor test to the whole just theory. It's like, why would the Buddha be all that preoccupied with Zoroastrianism or his disciples or anything like that? It just doesn't make it.
It wasn't even in India, not that I'm aware of. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, this is what the founding area of Buddhism was like in northeastern India. Is that right?
Yeah, the Ganges Valley, central Ganges Valley.
Yeah, so that would have been a very far journey from anywhere Zoroastrianism was being practiced at the time. Just doesn't.
And I haven't even I do not recall Persia even being mentioned in the Buddhist texts. Greeks are mentioned a few times, but for some reason the Persians, there's a warlike tribe called the Cambodjas, who I have read were an Iranian tribe, but they weren't actually, the kingdom of Persia. So yeah, we're kind of digressing a little bit, but in a way it's fair game, because the Persians and Scythians were Indo-European also. But there is like the at least superficial resemblance of the Buddha's nationality of the Shakya. He belonged to the Shakya tribe, or Sakya. And that there is some resemblance with Scythian or Scythian, but it could be that the entire argument ultimately rests on that resemblance of the two names.
Yeah, well, there seems like a whole field of pseudo scholarship today, where you just take these two words from different languages that sound kind of like one another, and then you develop a theory that they must be related. I've seen this done a lot, but you realize though it's the human vocal apparatus is only capable of making so many sounds, so it's bound sooner or later you're gonna get a lot of words from different languages either being the same word, same combination of speech sounds, or being similar. And even if they're not, when you sound them out, when you don't realize too, like when you transcribe or transliterate words from other language into modern English, the way they spell out on paper might look similar, but that might just not have any correspondence to how they were pronounced by ancient people. So there's a lot of pseudo scholarship from people who really don't know as much as maybe they present they do. And yeah, it's an easy way of selling books too. There's always a hungry audience for that kind of content.
Yeah, even Buddhism has its own Graham Hancocks.
Yeah. That's right. I remember you having a few choice words about him a while back.
Yeah. Yeah, I try to be open-minded, but if people's arguments obviously could be they're taking evidence that could obviously be interpreted in many ways and just like, focusing in on one and claiming that to be, correct. Not even like really a theory so much as just this is the way it is, and everyone else is mistaken. Then I really do not have much patience with that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So, well, we've delved into India a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just maybe we could try to reconstruct like the early Indo-European paganism as best we can, just to give an idea of what later forms of it, like Hinduism, for example, or the religions of Greece and Rome or ancient Germany, what that evolved from. Like we've already mentioned, you had fire sacrifices, sacrifices of animals, the occasional sacrifice of human beings, which are mentioned in Indian texts also. Maybe a hereditary priesthood performing these rituals mainly for the king, for the benefit of the entire tribe, perhaps. But it wasn't just like your average farmer, hiring a priest to do this big sacrifice. He might be doing, honoring his ancestors, on the family hearth or something. But the stuff that gets written down in texts is going to be larger scale stuff that the chiefs and the kings would be sponsoring.
Right.
And
that's right.
Originally you had a lot of emphasis on horses because the horse was so important to the Indo-Europeans, and a few gods, like we were talking about, Zeus or Joust Petri or Jupiter or Tiu or Zu or all of those, and maybe a few others. There have been some people who have hypothesized that the Indian god Varuna, who was like the god of cosmic order, maybe cognate with Uranus of the ancient Greeks, although that might just be another one of those cases of two names that are kind of similar, so people are combining them, conflating them.
Yeah, there might actually be something to that though, since we do have an ancestor language where I think the name in Proto, now these are all just hypothetical reconstructions, but I think the name's like Verunas is like the sky, the heaven, the cosmic order. So that might have been the root. So you think of Uranos and Varuna, and it's not too far of a stretch. But yeah, these are the basic concepts. So the Sky Father, the horse, definitely. Now we have the horse twins as a motif that shows up in a lot of these Indo-European religion. Asvins and in the Vedic. We have the Castor and Pollux in the Greco-Roman tradition, and we have one in our own. As we Anglo-Saxons, we have our own horse twins called Hengist and Horsa. Now, of course, the Christians euhemerized them and downgraded them just to historic, human figures who co-founded England after the Anglo-Saxon invasions. But I've been reading a lot of theorizing that these were probably deities. And this happened to so many European cultures that were Christianized. A lot of the gods were just downgraded to humans, usually kings or people like that.
And the Indians and the Romans both placed them up in the stars. I don't know if the Saxons did the same thing, but
yeah, we'll never know, because maybe they were, but any lore on that would have just been lost in the old memory hole.
Yeah.
But funny enough, one last thing on the Hengist and Horsa. Thomas Jefferson actually wanted to make the Hengist and Horsa to the founding kind of symbolic emblems of the United States, but I think he was a little ahead of his time. He was he was out there in his beliefs compared to some of the maybe his more boring contemporaries who just wanted to stick to Protestant Christianity.
Yeah, or maybe something more like what the French came up with was just reason being their
right. Yeah, we've seen where that's led us, but yeah. Uh, so yeah, I got the horse twins, the Sky Father, the fire sacrifices. That was
Yeah,
a
some
big one.
concept of fate or karma. Also,
Yeah.
we were talking about gods that can die, and even the Greeks, I mean, they had gods that could die. I mean, Dionysius was apparently killed and then brought back to life,
Right.
the thing.
Yeah, they do come back though. I, you see them often referred to as the Immortal Gods
Yeah,
in Greece.
yeah,
So
that's true.
they might have considered at least some of the higher, like the Olympian gods, to be immortal.
Yeah. And what would you say about like the ancient Roman, like the pagan Roman, their veneration of ancestors and so forth? What there were the like the manes or the manes and the lares and
The
that sort
Lares, yeah. Yeah, that came from an old agricultural Italic custom. Now, the Italic tribes, who the Romans were just one, they were the Latins, one of many Italic tribes. But uh, in the tribal days, everybody lived on rural plots of land, whether they're farms or pastures. And many subsequent generations would inhabit the same plot of land. So it was believed that ancestors or elements, some kind of spiritual elements of the ancestors, would protect that plot of land, and they would drive. If there was unwelcome family that tried to take the land, the ancestral spirits left over would like ward them off or something. But you had to maintain a relationship with these ancestral spirits by putting out offerings all the time. So that the lares, so you had what's you call a mantelpiece now. It's called a lararium. My Latin's a little rusty, but I believe that's something approximate to the pronunciation. So it's like an altar slash mantelpiece where you'd put up basically offerings and iconography and stuff to those spirits.
Yeah, and
So we get
that seems to be universal, I think, is ancestor veneration of ancestors just seems to be just like a human archetype or something. It's just found throughout the world.
yeah, that was big in Germanic paganism too.
Yeah. And the really great ones get to be gods after they die.
Yep. Yeah. I've seen neo-pagans like try to revive this practice, but it doesn't really make any sense. It's like worship art the ancestors. You mean from like another continent? Second of all your ancestors in recent history were Christians, so I don't know on the occult level how that whole thing would work out.
Yeah. Yeah, just trying to revive Indo-European paganism. It just seems like constructing a replica at best.
Yeah, that's what it is much of the time. It's a lot of cosplay and LARPing and that not real any kind of serious religion.
So would you say that the only Indo-European religion that I mean that is like originally Indo-European that still exists would be, well, I guess you'd have Zoroastrianism, which is still exists sort of like among the Parsis in India,
Right.
and then you
Yeah.
have Hindus themselves. I really don't consider Buddhism to have, like its main root extending into Indo-European religion, although it might. But it seems to be like really fundamentally influenced by the Indus Valley civilization's religion, which was more or less atheistic, and the world is a bad place that you should be trying to escape from, and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. I remember you mentioned that theory on that sounds plausible. Like the Shramana traditions were more based on the indigenous South Asian rather than Indo-European elements. That makes sense, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah, the in the older the Indo-European pagan religions, the idea of the world being something evil and something you have to escape spiritually, that would have been kind of a foreign concept, I think. These religions were very involved with living in the world heroically and with excellence, kind
this
of,
world religion.
yeah, owning your existence in this world
Yeah, so
and
the,
not,
the the sacrifices would be mainly for sons and cattle and victory over one's enemies rather than heaven.
yeah, probably they all had different versions of an afterlife you would go to. And I think most of the Indo-European tribes probably believed in some form of reincarnation or rebirth.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess the Thracians or the Dacians, which were related to the Thracians, they definitely believed in rebirth, and that made them such formidable fighters against the Romans, is because they weren't afraid to die because they just
Yeah,
figured to be born again.
that's right. Yeah. They were basically, it was almost like a genocide level event after the Romans were done with them. They were a pretty major culture in Eastern Europe, and that supposedly they had a better standard of living than Rome.
Really?
Yeah, there's a lot of archaeological studies done of like their villages that were dug up were apparently pretty nice places for the time.
Huh. Yeah, I never really. I mean, I've read or viewed, some information like Rome became very wealthy just from the influx of gold after they sacked, the main city of the Dacians, and they had to revise their armor because the Dacians used the falx, which was like a sword. But yeah, I mean they were hard to beat, but eventually the Romans, just through sheer stubbornness, I think may have been victorious in the end.
Yeah, I think they sharpened their swords quite a bit beating the Celts, and then they were able to take down the Dacians after that. And then when the Dacians were gone, then the Goths, then the Germanic tribes started like moving further east into Europe, and then the Slavs eventually expanded too. That's the other branch that the Slavs didn't really emerge in history till like way later.
Yeah, they were like a mixture of Sarmatians and some other northern tribes, I think, that had
Yeah, I
migrated northwards from the Yamnaya civilization or some such.
Yeah, I think the Slavs, they were kind of this people they lived in, supposedly the Proto-Slavic was just this tiny little culture living in the bog areas of what's now like the northern part of Ukraine, actually the part that still has like nuclear waste from Chernobyl all over it. That's supposedly like one of the areas where the Slavs emerged from, and then after the Goths like mass invaded like Italy and Spain and parts of Western Europe, it just opened up all this land, and then the Slavs expanded into that vacuum, and I think the Huns were pushing them in from the other side. During the whole collapse of Rome
Yeah.
era.
Also, they merged with the Sarmatians that were an Iranian tribe, so that
Mm.
nowadays the Baltic and Slavic languages are very similar in certain ways
They
to
are.
languages.
Yeah, some linguists they call it Balto-Slavic. They see that much similarity
Yeah.
between the two. And Baltic's actually one of the most conservative Indo-European languages. It has, like, if you hear it spoken or you see it written out, it has a lot of those like AS, US endings that you see in like Greek and Latin and some of the older ones. Proto-Germanic had those same endings too, like OS, or there was like AZ, OZ, like Oz, Oz, Os. And like old Celtic languages had all those same, like if you look at Gaulish written out, transcribed, it just looks like this weird form of Latin. So all the older Indo-European languages of Western and Central Europe and Eastern Europe all kind of looked alike
Yeah.
at one time like that. But yeah, so the Sarmatians, that's actually a good thing to bring in with the Slavs. I seen it theorized they were like the ruling warrior aristocracy over the Slavs, and then they just assimilated into that population, and then ended up expanding further into Europe.
Yeah.
I think the Polish have legends. They have folk legends of being of the Sarmatian, their nobility being descended from the Sarmatians, and it makes sense. I think the term for the Polish nobility. I'm going to butcher this because I can't speak Polish at all. It's a very difficult language to pronounce,
Yeah.
but I think their nobility is called like the Szlachta or something like that. And to me, it sounds like a mangled form of like Shatra, Kashatra, which
Yeah.
in the Indo-Iranian languages basically means the warrior, like the warrior nobility.
Yeah, and one of the major tribes of Sarmatians were the Alans or Alans, or I don't know how to pronounce the name, but that itself
Yeah.
is like a corruption of Aryan.
Yep. Yeah, it just means Aryan.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was another during the migration era. There was another tribe. They ended up like migrating with the Germanic tribes, and one of them with the Visigoths got all the way into Spain, and supposedly named Catalan in Spain, that region, Catalonia. It's just a corruption of Goth Alanya.
Oh,
That's
nice.
where the word Catalonia comes from. So yeah, that's kind of interesting
Goth,
to think about Goth Alanya.
yeah, or Goth Aria.
Goth yeah.
Yeah. So there's one branch of Hinduism. It's one of the the orthodox schools of Hinduism called the Mimamsaka or Mimamsa, and they've got sacrifice down to such um, a precise ritual that they have this belief that it's the sacrifice that pretty much controls the gods. You can like pretty much compel the gods to do your willing, and it actually maintains the universe. This fire sacrifice, and I was wondering if you were aware of anything like that farther west. Just such an emphasis on the sacrifice itself that it pretty much eclipses everything else because it's so powerful.
Yeah, I don't know if I have anything directly, but the concept behind it, I think, scales to the different religions. The idea of the sacrifice is at least symbolically upholding the cosmic order. So maybe it's you could say on the human level, you're sort of emulating the functions of the gods in the cosmos, and so you're making your human society kind of a reflection of that, and a part of the upholding of the universe. That's just my own kind of symbolic interpretation.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one thing that has made the Western, like the European race, so predominant with culturally and so forth, is that we have, in a way, we're like spiritual retards, and we're just very world like empirical and just sort of
Yeah.
extroverted. We're looking outwards to understand reality rather than inwards. And the Greeks were very much like that. And I think that could help explain why their paganism was so kind of secular in a way.
Right.
Their sacrifices, they would just wrap some fat around the thigh bones and burn that, and then they'd eat the good stuff,
Yeah. Basically, in Greece, the Greeks didn't have a hereditary priesthood, so you had this. There was the politicians were basically like the civic priests.
Yeah,
So
like
if you were like and they call it an archon, which is like a mayor, like a city council or something like that, they would conduct the public rites. So a sacrifice, let's say they sacrificed a cow or a bull, it would just be like a big barbecue for everybody. And
yeah,
they'd say a prayer to the gods, and it's just kind of just a civic. It was just like a civic happening. It's like what like a carnival would be in like a Latin American country or something like that. Just something that everybody did without probably thinking about it a whole lot.
yeah, cut the throat of a goat before the play begins, that sort of thing.
Right. Exactly. So yeah, you could say the Greek popular religion fell into a state of kind of a state of sadness to the point where the philosophers were openly mocking it. The Plato had a disdain for poets. He thought poets basically just ruined spirituality. They would just throw their own little spin. They were sort of the pop entertainers of the day. So the idea that they just profaned the gods by coming up with these ridiculous stories like Zeus going on like a rape rampage and stuff like that.
Rape and incest and
yeah. But these stories undoubtedly they entertain the plebs. So you got to convey some degree of symbolism of the function of these deities, no matter despite how vulgar a lot of these stories ended up being.
Yeah, it was like even the beginning of the Trojan War, where you got the three jealous goddesses trying to bribe Paris to vote for them. It's just, and then of course they're pissed off and jealous when the two of them lose, and yeah, I mean that in a way that was just just inevitably just destroying the religion because the religion was pretty much eclipsed. Any actual spirituality was eclipsed by these stories. And there are some people who say, well, there's like a deeper symbolic meaning and so forth, but I kind of doubt it. I think the deeper symbolic meaning may have been superimposed on it later.
Yeah, you had a lot of that, like kind of retrojecting a meaning on an older story. You got that with some of the philosophers too. They would come up with these convoluted explanations of what the myth really means.
Yeah. The New Testament's full of interpretations of the New Testament are similar.
Yeah, I mean Yeah, exactly. What the editors of the New Testament do, that was just a chip off the old block. These are just like Greek and Roman habits anyway of interpreting religion.
Yeah. So, I mean, in a way, it is kind of tragic that, the West, or the Indo-European race, at least the Western tribes of it, have become as powerful as they are largely through um, just being, as I mentioned earlier, just spiritual retards. And just relatively speaking, they're just less
Right.
spiritual, more just extroverted and empirical, which is very
Yeah.
powerful in understanding samsara, as it's called in India. But I mean, penetrating samsara, that was, I mean, they had something like that, had like the Orphic mysteries and that sort of thing in ancient Greece and Rome, but there was very little of that in the mainstream, like there still is in India. This,
Right. Yeah. I guess the mystery cults in Greece, that may be equivalent of like the guru, like the guru cults in India, where like people were actually interested in spirituality. They go to their guru and then it's basically is a type of mystery religion. Then the guru sort of reveals things to them as they progress spiritually, as far as I understand it.
yeah, it's possible.
Yeah.
Or in some
So
respects, it could even be just some sacred shrine that you go to for, healings and that sort of thing. There seems to be a little bit of overlap with that kind of attitude also.
yeah, yeah, there's definitely some of that too. And then with the Greek religion, there's the whole folk kind of underbelly that doesn't really get acknowledged a whole lot because they usually focus on the philosophy, the myths, and like the dramas and stuff. But there are all kinds of just local cults. There were cults to like whatever local nymph of a pond or a lake. Now I think in the Indian Vedic tradition, the closest thing to associate with a nymph would be a Naga. I think
Uh,
the Nagas.
no, I think the closest thing you'd have to a nymph in like Buddhist philosophy, ancient Buddhist philosophy, would be like a Rukadeva or just earthbound deities that, one
Yeah.
like a Rukadeva would be like an earthbound deity just one level above the human level that lives in a large venerable tree. And even today in Southeast Asia, you can still find shrines below large trees honoring these, tree dwelling deities and so forth. But a Naga
Okay.
would be like essentially like a snake, like a cobra dragon.
Yeah, dragon, like a dragon spirit. Yeah, no, that makes
But also you
sense.
had like the celestial nymphs, but they were up in heaven.
Yeah. Done in Buddhist legends, I don't know if this is Mahayana or Theravada, but you have stories of Nagas getting converted to Buddhism and then becoming enlightened.
They can't become enlightened because technically they're animals, at least in
Oh, okay.
Buddhism. Although there is a story of a Naga who was essentially a cobra dragon, which my theory is it's descended from, prehistoric cobra worship. But they can assume human form. They've got more or less human intelligence. So this one cobra dragon assumed human form and was ordained as a monk. But when they're asleep, they have to resume their natural form. And so you got these huge scaly coils overflowing the hut, And so then the Buddha says, no, you can't stay a monk because you're not human. And then now in every ordination of a Theravada Buddhist monk, um, one of the questions is, are you human? Just to make sure that we don't have any shape-shifting non-humans.
Oh, so I didn't know that. The Dharma is only for humans.
Um, well, I mean, other kinds of beings can follow the Dharma, but they can't be ordained.
Oh, okay, I
Can't be
getcha.
ordained as monks or nuns.
Interesting. Yeah, I might have been thinking of Mahayana, where you get these grandiose, some of the sutras, you get these grandiose stories of like every mythological creature under the book being like included in these narratives and like meditating before like one of the cosmic Buddhas.
Yeah, yeah, or just millions of them attending sermons given by some mythological, prehistoric Buddha, that sort of thing. Yeah, there's some
Yeah,
in Theravada also.
yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So, um, yeah, what other corner of the Indo-European realm have we not touched on?
Well,
Oh, there's a
that's
couple
pretty much,
branches people, some of the lesser known ones, like the poor Albanians, nobody even pays attention to them, and
yeah,
do they?
Albania could just disappear off the map, and probably nobody would notice.
Yeah.
At least in America, nobody would notice.
Yeah, nobody would notice. Some people think they might have been an offshoot of the Thracians, but nobody really knows.
Yeah, I assume the Albanian language is unique. I mean, it's not closely related to any others, and they do think that it could be like what's left of the Illyrian, like it was called Illyria in the Roman Empire, which was partly Thracian anyway.
Yeah, that's right. I think some of the later emperors actually were Illyrians, maybe Diocletian and his progeny.
Yeah.
Or was he Dalmatian? I can't. He was from somewhere on the other side of the Adriatic coast.
Yeah, I think pretty much all of that was Illyricum or Illyria, except for maybe every once in a while they'd redraw the official map of Italy, so it might expand and contract a little bit. But
yeah, that's right. So we had the Armenians. I think a lot of people don't even think Indo-European when they hear them. They think just like Middle Eastern.
Yeah.
So I think that's like culturally what they are. They had
oldest Indo-European races to be represented in history with written records and so forth. Or the Hittites also were at least after they got conquered, they were Indo-European, at least the ruling aristocracy.
Yeah, that's right. The ruling aristocracy there was probably the bulk of the population were Hurrians.
Yeah.
Who they were very numerous throughout like eastern Anatolia, northern Mesopotamia, and like the western part of the Iranian plateau. They were like a very numerous people that were there. And I think the Mitanni kingdom, most of the commoner population, I think, was of Hurrian extraction.
Yeah.
So then the most obscure, I believe, branch left are the Tocharians.
Yeah.
The supposedly redheaded people that got all the way to Western China, what's now where the Uyghurs live today.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, you actually see among the. I mean, they look like an Asiatic people today, but you get a few redheads among them today.
Yeah, sort of like the Afghans. Every once in a while, you find a blue-eyed one.
Right. Yeah, you get a few of those. But yeah, well, religion-wise, we don't know anything really about the religion, except some of the remnants of the Tocharians might have converted to Buddhism. Actually, I think they did.
Yes, Central Asia was predominantly Buddhist up until Islam came along.
Right, that's right. And some of the people, some of the Central Asian people who spread Buddhism into China were of various Iranian ethnic groups. I think Bodhidharma, that no one knows for sure, but they think he was maybe either a Bactrian or Persian or somebody like an Iranian speaker from Central Asia.
Oh, really? Yeah, and they did invade northwestern India after the Greeks did, and it was the Kushans and I think they're called the Yuezhi, who were partly Tocharian.
That's right. Yeah, that would make sense. They might have been like a tribal confederation of different Central Asian peoples.
I have had one idea. Maybe you might be able to shed a little bit of light on it. But the Eastern races tend to be intelligent and very self-disciplined, but not very innovative. They're very conservative in that sense. Like even nowadays, the Americans and the Europeans invent things, and then the Chinese and the Japanese perfect them.
Right.
And, so I was wondering, like, a lot of the inventions that the Chinese came up with, the really important ones, like possibly gunpowder, the printing press, paper, that sort of thing. I was wondering how much of that could have been influenced just by the Indo-European innovativeness, like possibly coming from the Tarim Basin, or like the Indo-Europeans inhabiting Western China.
I don't know. Nobody really knows. It's a possibility, though. You
Yeah.
could have had wise Chinese emperors who brought in, let's just say, more innovative people from foreign lands and employed them as craftsmen. That could be a possibility too. Some of the Chinese cities from the Middle Ages, you'd have these cities where you get these different quarters, parts of the city that were occupied by various different foreign ethnicities. So there was a lot of like foreigners living in these places. So you very well, I know that not the most innovative race of people, but wise enough to recognize others who are, and you know, put their skills to use in enhancing their own dominions.
Yeah. Well, they were kind of innovative, at least China was, like during the Warring States period in the spring and autumn period, just with regard to warfare. But that was pretty
Yeah.
much necessary, I suppose.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Definitely out of necessity.
But
Yeah.
I guess we've strayed away from Indo-European paganism, and we've been at it for an hour at present. So maybe we should wrap it up.
Yeah.
Unless you got something more you want to say, in which case you're very welcome to say it.
I don't know. I think my brain is migrated all over the steps. So
Yeah.
conquered a few topics here. So yeah, no, that was good talk.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much then, and maybe we can do another one someday.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
All right. So I'm going to stop recording now.
All right.